On the morning of May 9, 1914, silence hung over a quiet house in Santa Barbara, California. Inside, one of the richest men in America was awake before dawn. Charles William Post did not leave a letter. He did not call for help. A single rifle shot echoed through the home, ending the life of a man who had built an empire from breakfast tables across the nation. News spread rapidly. Newspapers across the United States reported the death with disbelief. Charles William Post was not supposed to die like this. He was a self-made tycoon, a health reformer, a relentless optimist. His company fed millions. His advertisements shaped American habits. Yet behind the success was a man consumed by pain, illness, and despair. Charles William Post was born in 1854, long before cereal became a symbol of modern life. He struggled for decades before finding success. His breakthrough came not from luxury, but from anxiety. His own failing health led him to Battle Creek, Michigan, where America's obsession with diet and digestion was quietly being born. At the Battle Creek Sanitarium, run by Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, Post encountered radical ideas about food and health. There, he discovered grain-based substitutes and the power of belief. When he left, he didn't just take ideas with him, he took a business model that would change American mornings forever. Post founded the Postum Cereal Company and unleashed a marketing revolution. He did not simply sell food, he sold fear, discipline, and hope. Coffee was dangerous. Traditional diets were harmful. His cereals promised energy, purity, and modernity. Americans listened. Sales exploded. By the early 1900s, Charles Post was worth millions. His products, Postum, Grape Nuts, Post Toasties, were household names. Yet his body was failing. Chronic abdominal pain haunted him. Doctors offered diagnoses, surgeries, reassurances, but no relief. Wealth could not cure what medicine did not yet understand. His condition worsened. Post traveled thousands of miles to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, where surgeons operated on him repeatedly. The procedures were deemed successful. He returned to California. But the pain remained. And with it came depression, isolation, and a growing sense of finality. When Charles William Post died, he left behind more than grief. He left behind an empire worth over $20 million, an astronomical sum in 1914. Factories. Patents. Workers. Distribution networks. And at the center of it all stood a 27-year-old woman, his only child, Marjorie Merriweather Post. Marjorie Merriweather Post inherited something unprecedented. In a nation where women could not yet vote, she became one of the most powerful business figures in America overnight. The newspapers called her an heiress. But what they failed to understand was this: she had been trained for this moment her entire life. Unlike most men of his era, Charles Post did not raise his daughter to be ornamental. He brought her into boardrooms. He explained contracts. He discussed supply chains and advertising strategy. While other girls learned etiquette, Marjorie learned how empires functioned. By her teenage years, Marjorie understood production, logistics, and finance. She toured factories. She reviewed reports. She watched her father negotiate. When tragedy struck in 1914, she was not stepping into chaos, she was stepping into responsibility. The death of Charles William Post was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of a far larger one. The question was no longer how a man built an empire, but what a woman would do with it. And how far she would take it beyond anything her father had imagined. In 1914, American industry was not built for women. Boardrooms were male, banks were skeptical, and authority was questioned the moment she entered a room. Yet Marjorie Merriweather Post did not retreat. She assumed control of the Postum Company quietly, decisively, and without apology. She reviewed operations personally. She demanded efficiency. She trusted data over tradition. Employees noticed the difference immediately. Where her father ruled by force of personality, Marjorie ruled by precision. Profit stabilized. Expansion resumed. At the time of her inheritance, Marjorie was married to Edward Bennett Close, a New York lawyer from a socially established family. Their marriage offered status but little partnership. Close did not share her ambition, nor her appetite for power. As Marjorie's authority grew, the imbalance in the marriage became impossible to ignore. By 1919, the union ended in divorce. It was her first major personal decision as a woman with both wealth and independence, and it would not be her last. Marjorie began reshaping the company her father built. In 1929, Postum was renamed General Foods, reflecting its growing dominance beyond cereal. It became one of the largest food corporations in the world, supplying products across continents. This transformation was not accidental. Marjorie understood branding, diversification, and timing. She expanded product lines, acquired competitors, and positioned General Foods as a pillar of American consumer culture. In 1920, Marjorie married her second husband, Edward Francis Hutton, founder of E.F. Hutton and Company. This was no social arrangement. It was a financial alliance. Together, they formed one of the most powerful couples in American business. Under Hutton's financial expertise and Marjorie's industrial control, her fortune multiplied. By the late 1920s, she was one of the richest people, male or female, in the United States. Then came 1929. The stock market crashed. Fortunes evaporated overnight. Banks failed. Breadlines formed. Yet Marjorie Merriweather Post did not retreat behind gates. She acted. While still wearing diamonds worth millions, she organized food distribution, funded relief programs, and ensured General Foods continued to employ thousands. Her wealth became a stabilizing force rather than a symbol of excess. Her marriage to E.F. Hutton ended in divorce in 1933. But another chapter began almost immediately. In 1935, Marjorie married Joseph E. Davies, a lawyer and diplomat closely tied to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Davies was appointed U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union. Marjorie followed him to Moscow, entering one of the most dangerous political environments of the 20th century. In the Soviet Union, Marjorie dined with Joseph Stalin and witnessed the brutality and paranoia of the regime firsthand. While others feared exposure, she observed carefully, and collected. As Russian aristocrats fled or were executed, priceless imperial treasures were sold to survive. Marjorie purchased Faberge eggs, icons, and artworks, preserving pieces of Russian history that would have otherwise vanished. Back in the United States, Marjorie began constructing symbols of permanence. In Palm Beach, she expanded Mar-a-Lago, transforming it into one of the most opulent private residences in America. She also commissioned the Sea Cloud, the largest privately owned yacht ever built at the time, a floating palace that symbolized her unmatched wealth and authority. Despite her riches, Marjorie never lost discipline. She managed estates like corporations. She curated collections with historical intent. Power, to her, was something to be organized, not flaunted. By the late 1930s, she was no longer simply an heiress or executive. She was an institution, bridging business, politics, culture, and diplomacy in a way few individuals ever had. When World War II erupted, Marjorie Merriweather Post was already one of the most powerful private citizens in America. But war transformed wealth into obligation. Once again, she stepped forward, not as a spectator, but as a participant. She offered her yachts, estates, and logistical networks to the United States government. Her floating palace, the Sea Cloud, was converted into a weather reconnaissance ship for the U.S. Coast Guard. Mar-a-Lago was transformed from a symbol of luxury into a functional wartime facility. It served as a rest center for military personnel and hosted strategic gatherings under government supervision. While others protected their wealth, Marjorie mobilized it. Her actions reflected a belief that private power carried public responsibility, a philosophy rare among the elite. After divorcing Joseph E. Davies in 1955, Marjorie married Herbert May, her final husband. Unlike previous unions, this marriage was quiet, private, and intentionally removed from power. By then, Marjorie no longer needed alliances. She had outlived rivals, surpassed her father's fortune, and secured her place in American history. As she aged, Marjorie began dismantling her private empire, not through collapse, but through donation. Her homes were converted into museums. Her collections were given to the public. Hillwood Estate, her Washington, D.C. residence, became a permanent home for her Russian art collection. The treasures she saved decades earlier were finally accessible to the world. At her peak, Marjorie Merriweather Post was worth over $200 million, equivalent to several billion dollars today. Yet numbers alone failed to capture her impact. She redefined what inheritance meant. She did not simply preserve her father's empire, she multiplied it, reshaped it, and ultimately redistributed it. Marjorie Merriweather Post died on September 12, 1973, at the age of 86. She left behind no single successor, because her legacy no longer belonged to one person. She had become something far rarer than a billionaire. She had become a permanent figure in the American cultural landscape. Charles William Post built an empire. His daughter turned it into a civilization of influence, spanning food, diplomacy, war, art, and public memory. The rifle shot of 1914 ended one life. But it began another story, one that proved power does not always pass quietly, nor does it remain the same. Marjorie Merriweather Post lived in a world that denied women authority. She took it anyway, without slogans, without rebellion, through mastery. Her story is not about wealth. It is about control, preparation, and what happens when opportunity meets discipline. From a fatal shot in Santa Barbara to palaces, warships, and museums, this was not a tale of inheritance, but of transformation. History remembers those who build. It remembers even more those who take what is given, and turn it into something greater.